John chapter 18, which is found on page 1176. John chapter 18, starting at verse 28. Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the place of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace, because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," they objected. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the King of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked. "Or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" retorted Pilate. With this, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, "I find no basis for a charge against him, but it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the King of the Jews?" They shouted back, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas." Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising.
I hope you've got John 18 open in front of you. We are going to be diving into these verses a little bit now. But as it was just read to us by Lucy, I wonder if you were thinking, boy, what would it have been like to be in a fly on the wall there? I mean, we are, sort of speaking, a fly on the wall. We're hearing about what was going on. But what an encounter, what tension between Jesus and Pilate. Jesus was always a controversial figure, and he remains a controversial figure today. And in this section, it's no exception to that. I mean, just as an example, see what he's saying in verse 37. Here's what he said. He said, "The reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth." Imagine if somebody turned up and said that to you. The reason I was born, the reason I came into the world was to testify to the truth, was to speak to the truth, or to speak truth, we might say. But he then goes on and says, "Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." I mean, what a claim. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. If you met somebody today who said that, "Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." Imagine somebody putting that on Facebook or Twitter or something. "Everybody on the side of truth listens to me." You think, goodness me. Goodness me. Because the implication, of course, is, and if you're not listening to me, you're not on the side of truth. You're into lies. Well, what a thing to say. Jesus is a controversial figure, and he divides. He's making it here difficult to stay neutral about him. You sort of have to choose. he's sort of saying, well, are you on the side of truth or the side of lies? Are you going to listen to me or not? Well, welcome to Carlisle Baptist Church. Welcome this morning. Welcome to our series in John's Gospel. We started last week. We're looking at the events of the very first Easter as recorded for us by John. And we'll be doing that over the next few weeks as we run up to Easter. If you're not normally here or it's your first time in church, we're thrilled that you're here and that you're with us. And this is the part in our gathering in the morning when we try and dive into the Bible. When we look at some verses from the Bible, we try and see what they're saying. And so that's why I've just said you might find it useful to have that open in front of you on page 1176. I've got 4 things that I want us to see this morning, or really 4 people or groups of people that we're going to see. It's just really in the order that we read them in the passage, but we're going to see the leaders, we're going to see Pilate, we're going to look at Jesus, and we're going to finally meet Barabbas right at the end. So the first of those is these religious leaders. And they are all about religion, but not really about holiness. How do we know they're all about religion? Well, we meet them in verse 28, and they have taken Jesus to the Roman governor, but they don't want to go inside. The reason they don't want to go inside is it was considered that for a Jewish person to go into a non-Jew's house would make them ceremonially unclean. They're happy to go into the courtyard. It doesn't have a roof. It might be kind of sort of inside, but there's no roof, so they feel they're okay there. But they don't want to go right inside. So we know that they're religious. They're trying to observe religious rules. And they want to be able to continue in the week-long Passover festivities that are happening, and they think if they go inside, they won't be able to do that. But here's the thing, they're very keen to do the right thing. I mean, not even go in this person's house, or palace, actually. But they're very happy at the same time to stitch somebody up without any evidence. They've delivered Jesus, and they're very happy to sort of stitch him up and get him accused of something. It's like the kids arriving back at the house. They've been rolling around in mud. They're literally dripping in mud. And they say, don't worry, I'll take my shoes off at the door. Do you mean? And then they'll trail through the house, dripping mud everywhere. So they're sort of, they want to do the right thing. Verse 28, oh no, we couldn't possibly come inside, you know. But then they're trying to stitch up somebody and actually get them killed. Well, Pilate meets them, and he has just a very basic question. Verse 29, what are the charges against this man? I mean, it's basic, isn't it? They're looking to have the guy executed. Well, what are the charges? What are the charges? What is their answer? Well, their answer is, well, you know, he must be a criminal because we've brought him. He must be a criminal. I mean, it's comical, isn't it? It's no real answer. They don't even have any charges that they know will stick in the eyes of the Roman authorities. Says, well, he must be a criminal. Look, we've tied him up, we've brought him. It's like if I captured you now and tied you up and took you round a Carlisle train station, and we arrive on the platform, and one of the helpful people there says, oh, what train? What train is this person looking to get on? And I say, well, they must be looking to get on a train. They're here at the train station. You know. Yeah, so it doesn't specify any train. The only reason they're at the train station is I tied them up and took them there. But they must be looking to get on a train. They're here. It's ludicrous, isn't it? It's ludicrous. They've captured Jesus. They bring him along. He says, what's the charge? You don't need to worry about that. He must be a criminal. He's here. He's tied up. It's just ridiculous, isn't it? So Pilate, I think, senses this, and he says, you take him and judge him under your own rules. The Jews under the Romans, they had quite a lot of freedom to rule and exercise judgments on people and run courts and things like this. And he says, 31, you take him, you judge him. But they say, but we don't have the right to execute anybody. It reveals what they're really pushing for. As I've said, they want Jesus dead. It's kind of a comical exchange if it wasn't so serious, if it wasn't a man's life hanging in the balance, if it wasn't so wrong. By the end of the section that we've read, we discover that they'd rather have Barabbas, who was a known murderer, the other Gospels tell us, they'd rather have him released. What motivates them? What motivates them? Well, back in John chapter 11, we get a little insight into what's going on in their heads. John 11, they talking amongst themselves, say this. If we let him go on like this, Jesus, if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation. Now you could, if you want to be charitable to them, you could say, well, they're worried about these important things, the temple, the nation, there's bigger things at stake. If you want to be less charitable, you could say they fear they might lose influence and position. But either way, it's appalling behaviour what they're doing here. Yes, they're religious, but there doesn't seem to be much holiness going on. It's worth just reflecting for us, folk in church, there's no place for such hypocrisy in church, is there? There's no place for claiming to be religious or claiming to be a Christian if there's no actual holiness in our lives. Well, let's move on. The second person we're going to look at is Pilate. Pilate, he has power, but he has no backbone. I was searching for a creature that has no backbone. Jellyfish. There we go. So he has power, but he has no backbone. John, in this bit that we're looking at, but also as we go on into chapter 19, John shows Pilate is backwards and forwards. He keeps saying he's inside, he's outside, he's meeting back inside, he's back outside, and the action goes forwards and back. It's, I think, what they call now shuttle diplomacy. He's backwards and forwards. But it also is that Pilate seems weak. He seems very changeable. He doesn't really stand up for things. He vacillates, I think you could say. He's backwards and forwards. He's very changeable. And it seems like Jesus, although Jesus is the prisoner here, he is patiently trying to help Pilate. How? Well, have a look with me at verse 33. It says, Pilate then went back inside the palace after he'd been outside. He summons Jesus. He says, "Are you King of the Jews?" What does Jesus say? Jesus says, "Is that your idea? Or have others talked to you about me?" He obviously knows that's exactly what's happened. So Pilate asks Jesus a question. Jesus turns the tables on him and asks him a question back. Jesus often did that with people, responding to a question with another question. But he turns the tables on him, but he's also saying to Pilate, "Pilate, why don't you think for yourself? Why don't you think for yourself?" Pilate says, "I'm no Jew. Your own people seem to think that, there's a problem. What is it that you've done?" And Jesus in verse 36, I think just wants to communicate to Pilate, "I'm no threat to you, Pilate. I'm not about sort of political power. I'm not a threat to the Romans in the way that you might be worried about me being a threat to the Romans." It's brilliant, really, his answer in 36, because he says, "I am a king, but I'm not a king like you are thinking about. My kingdom's not of this world." But then Pilate says, so you are a king. Verse 37. And then there's that bit that we looked at earlier. Jesus says, well, you say I'm a king. In fact, the very reason I came into the world was to speak truth. Was to speak truth. And then Pilate replies in 38 with that very modern question, or we might say postmodern question, what is truth? What is truth, Pilate says. Can we ever really know truth and what truth is? Something might be true for you, it doesn't necessarily mean it's true for me. That's the modern way of thinking, isn't it? Or a common way of thinking in our day. You can make your own truth. You can define things however you want to. But interestingly, the Bible says that's actually not true. There is ultimate truth and ultimate reality. Jesus here is saying no to that idea. So it's interesting to me if you read what Jesus says in verse 37, but you substitute, instead of the word truth, you put in reality. You'd have Jesus saying, in fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to reality. Everyone on the side of reality listens to me. Or to put it another way, Jesus is saying, I'm here to tell people how it really is. How things really are. What's really the deal with the world, with them, with God, with their interaction with God. I'm here to speak some reality into a confused world. Well, after he said what is truth, Pilate's back outside again. He said, I find no basis to charge him. I don't see what the issue is. But perhaps he's worried about the crowd. Perhaps he's worried about what others think. But that isn't actually the end of it. Jesus isn't now free to go. It's easy to look at Pilate a bit like a jellyfish, a bit lacking in backbone, easily swayed, it seems, by the crowd. But which one of us doesn't know that feeling of worrying about what people think? What would people say? Jesus says, if you want to get real, you should listen to me. You should listen to me. Well, that brings us to my third person, Jesus. We've already seen Jesus in action. But I've said here, Jesus challenge without fault. What do I mean by that? Well, he's been challenged. He's been arrested. He's been kind of put forward as a criminal. But no fault can be found. Or Pilate says he doesn't find any reason to charge him. But there's another way you could understand this as well. Jesus challenged without fault. Jesus, I think, has gently tried to challenge Pilate. He's done it in a kind of faultless way. He hasn't incriminated himself. He hasn't denied that he's king. But he said, not in the way that you think. But there's a massive challenge in what Jesus says, isn't there? I've already said he's controversial. It's very challenging what he says in verse 37. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. That is a challenging statement. It's a challenge to Pilate, but it's a challenge to anyone who reads this. Do we believe Jesus when he says this? Now, if you're just looking into Christian things, maybe you're just finding out what do Christians believe, or does Jesus say, I wonder what you make of that. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me, says Jesus. And perhaps you're more familiar with these ideas, but can I just say, do you notice it doesn't say in brackets, only when it's convenient to you and isn't very costly? Everyone on the side of truth listens to me, even when it's inconvenient to you, and it might be costly. It might be unpopular. Back in John 8, Jesus has previously talked about truth. He said this. He said, if you hold to my teaching, you're really my disciples. He said, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So Jesus doesn't says it's not just about being right or wrong. It's not just about reality and knowing how things really are. But he says the truth will set you free. It will set you free spiritually. It will set you free eternally. Well, back in John 18, there's an interesting little detail in verse 32. Verse 32, we've already seen. The Jews say, but we have no right to execute anyone. Well, yes and no. Yes and no. So, I mean, they don't, but actually, recorded in the New Testament are the Jews executing some people. Stephen, you might know at the start of Acts, is stoned by the Jews, and Jesus himself prevents a woman from being stoned in one of the gospel accounts. And it seems that although they didn't have the official right to execute people through their courts, the Romans perhaps turned a blind eye to sort of an unruly mob stoning somebody to death. A hideous and horrible way to die, I would imagine. But Jesus was not going to die that way. He was not going to die by stoning. He was not going to die a death that really pounds somebody into the ground. He was going to die a death where he was going to be lifted up. Back in John 12, verse 32, it says this. Jesus says this. He says, when I'm lifted up from the earth, I'll draw all people to myself. And then it says he said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. Here, this whole process is happening so that it's the Romans who sentenced Jesus to death, so that Jesus' death will be on a Roman cross, not a Jewish stoning, so that Jesus will be lifted up in his death, not pounded into the ground. He'll become a visible rallying point, a place where people can come, or the cross will become a place where people can come. A place where you can come to find that the truth will set you free. A place or an event, that first Easter, that shows us how the truth can set us free. How we can be set free spiritually and eternally. But this is also a little reminder that God is in control of events. God is making sure that Jesus dies, but that his death happens in a certain way. It was part of a bigger plan. Even the means of Jesus' death, or the manner of his death, is kind of being organised. Jesus had talked about it before. I'll be pushed up, I won't be pushed down. Be lifted up, not crushed. Well, our time's nearly gone, so very quickly, the fourth person, Barabbas, we meet him right at the end. Barabbas is mentioned in other Gospels, and if you piece the bits together, he's an insurrectionist, a rebel. He's raised up rebellion, and that's mentioned here, but he's also mentioned as a criminal and, in fact, a murderer, as I have already said. His name, Barabbas, has an interesting meaning. In Hebrew, if somebody has the name Bar in their name, it means son of, just like in English you might have the name Robinson, and that means some ancestor of yours was the son of Robin. The son bit that we have in English, the equivalent of that then was Bar. So Barabbas, we think, oh, he must be the son of Abbas or somebody. But actually what it means is son of the father. Son of the father. There's an interesting story behind that, isn't it? How come his mum presumably gave him that name? You know, whose son is he? It's the Son of the Father. I don't know. What was she trying to hide? I don't know. But it's a slightly unusual name. Son of the Father. And that's who the people want released right at the very end when they're giving a choice of Jesus being released. But here's the thing. They're being given a choice of the Son of the Father or the Son of the Father. But there's a big difference in the Father, isn't it? Barabbas' father, well, we don't know much about him. It's the Son of the Father in heaven. That's the choice. This criminal, Son of the Father, or the Son of the Father. Except that they didn't believe that, did they? The crowd didn't believe that. They didn't believe that was the choice they were being offered. Because if they had, they would, of course, have said, we want Jesus. They didn't believe that Jesus spoke the truth. Jesus has said here, I speak the truth. You ought to listen to me and not to lies. They also didn't believe that, did they? And so Barabbas is freed. It has been pointed out, Barabbas is the only person in the New Testament, the only person who's saved by the substitution of Jesus in their place, actually recorded for us in the New Testament, except Barabbas. Jesus takes his place. He's saved, but he's only saved physically, and he's only saved temporarily. He's saved from death. He was heading for execution, and it's a temporary thing. He would later die, wouldn't he? But the amazing claim of the New Testament is for those who think Jesus is speaking the truth, those who do listen to him, those who do find out about what it means to have the truth set you free, to have Jesus' death on the cross set us free. Then Jesus can be a substitute for us, not physically and temporarily, but spiritually and eternally. So, the challenge of the first Easter, and we're going to see this again and again over the coming weeks. Do we think Jesus is telling the truth? Do we think John's Gospel speaks the truth to us? Do we know what it means that Jesus can be a substitute for us on the cross? Are we listening to him? Are we trusting him? Let me pray. Father, we thank you for what we've been able to think about just now. Father, I pray that you'd help us to know and understand what's been said here. I pray that you'd help us to look into these things a bit more thoroughly than perhaps Pilate did, a bit more honestly than the religious leaders did, that you'd help us to know what it means to have Jesus die in our place, like Barabbas did, but in a much more significant way for us. Father, I pray that this Easter might be a time of either reminding us of these things or perhaps us discovering just the wonder of them in a new way or even for the first time. Father, I pray you'd help us to do that. Amen.